What if you were sitting on a gold mine of equity that could actually retire you decades earlier? Hi, I'm Jared Krause.
And I'm Sam Powell, and we're the hosts of Property Pals Australia. And in this episode, we're discussing in more detail what equity is and how to pull that out of your current property, whether it is a owner-occupier or an investment property, and what you can actually do with that. That can help you amplify your road to financial freedom and time freedom. Which is we share a few interesting stories and some really great examples to try and help you get through the minefield of numbers in the finance industry.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. We did a calculation on what it would look like if you owned a home, and you had equity in that home, and what you could do to build that portfolio or build out a portfolio to build your wealth as a homeowner, and then purchasing other investment properties. And we also talk about it if you're a rent investor as well, and what that looks like in terms of if you own a property that you have invested in and then you also rent, what that looks like, what your repayments would look like if you draw equity out, what it would look like tax-wise, how you can decrease your taxable income, and then some scenarios on like how many properties you could build or buy, and how many is too many.
Yeah, there's a lot in this one, and we share a few key industry secrets, which definitely listen through and helps you understand what you're actually getting involved in. But as always, this is a really great episode, so please dive in. It is also not the only way that we can help people for free, so please head over to our website, propertypals.au/resources, where we have a how to maximize your borrowing capacity mini course, and it's a free PDF download, so jump in there. It helps you understand the ins and outs to increase your return on investment when you're going down this path. So enjoy the episode and see you on the inside.
Welcome to Property Pals, the podcast where we share everything around how to build a property portfolio, from researching areas, financing, structuring, buying, selling, and reinvesting to live a life of financial independence. As a disclaimer, any information shared by myself, Jared, Sam, and the Property Pals team is strictly general and should not be taken as constituting professional advice. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, and taxation advice from a qualified professional.
Spaghetti.
So last Friday, we went to dinner, you, me, and a couple of mates.
Yes.
And we got a good mate that it's been bugging me for a couple of years, who has some money. He bought a property. I actually lived in his property in Palm Beach. Camo, talking about you. We're at dinner and I was speaking to Camo. I lost my voice because I was yelling so loud over the band.
Yeah, poor acoustics.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. And we were talking about him buying another property because he's owned this property for many, many years. 6 years, in fact. And it grew through the COVID period. And I think it was a year ago when we're at one of our fantasy surfing events, I was talking to him about, reinvesting and taking equity out. And he's like, I don't get it. I don't understand how it works. And I was explaining to him again. He had a million questions. And I said, you should come on the podcast and ask these questions. And he didn't seem too excited to do that. A bit nervous, but that's totally fine. We've got some questions that we do want to answer.
Yeah, a few people have messaged us and asked us to cover a few things. So here we are. We're going to jump into it.
Yeah, so let's just use round figures and round numbers for this. But first and foremost, what is equity? Like, let's just get that sort of out of the way.
Yeah. Well, equity is the money that you have available in the property. So, example, you have a property, you bought it, say it was $800,000 when you bought it, and you needed $600,000 in debt to secure that.
Mm-hmm.
You now bought that property, you got the $600,000 in debt. The equity component is the $200,000 difference from what it's worth to the debt that you own on it. So it's basically, when you sell everything on a property portfolio, what you get in your bank account is your equity.
Mm-hmm.
So in this calculation circumstance, the property that you bought it for $800,000. You had $200,000 in equity and $600,000 in debt. You've left it on interest-only repayment, so that $600,000 debt stays at $600,000 debt, and then over the time, it's increased to $1 million in value. So your equity now has gone from $200,000 to $400,000 in equity in that sense.
Love it. So equity is also, I guess, another word for cash or money that is yours that you own. Because if you're like when we're investing in other things as well, when you got cash in the bank and you go invest in it with that cash, people call that you're putting your own equity into it, right?
Yep.
And equity is like So let's. The tricky thing is how much can people get out and how much should they get out? And this is going to be very dependent on your property portfolio. But let's talk about how much you can get out. So there's different levels of LVR, and you can only take out a certain amount to a certain LVR. And Sam, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you for this one.
Yeah, well, generally, the equity when you're drawing equity out of one property, the 80% loan to value ratio is what banks work on, and you don't have to pay lender's mortgage insurance, which jargon LMI is that. If you don't carry loan to value ratio higher than 80%, so and that's also that's a risk assessment for the bank too. Like everyone's obviously got certain risk appetites. And because property from the long-term growth perspective is quite low in that risk sense, that people can go up to 90, 95% loan-to-value ratios, even higher, especially in the past. They used to you could borrow the full amount plus stamp duty, which is insane.
And governments are getting close to doing certain things like that now, but we won't make this content non-evergreen.
That's always changing.
It's always changing. Yeah.
Yeah, so the whole purpose of the equity side, I would say, if you've got a current property, pulling the equity out on that, basically when I say pulling equity out is you've got a principal place of residence as an example, common one. It's worth $1 million now. You've got the $600,000 in debt, so you want to extract that equity out. What you'll be doing is going up to an 80% loan to value ratio. Therefore, you've got no fees involved from lender's mortgage insurance. And if you're buying another investment property, you want to try and reduce your fees as much as possible, but also not over leverage yourself too much either. And certain banks, they might do greater than 80%, but then there's you're reducing your potential pool of lenders, which getting a good mortgage broker on your side to have these conversations is really influential. But for simplistic sakes, stick to that 80% loan to value ratio for the drawing equity out component, and then on that $1 million asset that you're sitting on, $600,000 in debt, has received $400,000 in equity there. But if you're going to that 80% loan to value ratio, what that is saying is you've got the $1 million in asset, 80% of that you can have in debt, so that brings up to $800,000. So you've still got the $200,000 buffer from the bank's perspective, which is healthy. But your debt now can go from $600,000 to $800,000. So what that means is you can then take that $200,000, basically the bank, you refinance it, the bank put it into your bank account, and you can offset your mortgage with that. Some people use that. A lot of people use that to go and use that as a deposit to go and buy an investment property. Other people might just put it in there just as access to cash if they need it. The biggest thing that people don't realize is that you're pulling your debt's going from
finance.
Yeah,
you're using finance. Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah. So it's money. It's borrowed money. So you're increasing your borrowing of money. So you're now no longer making the repayment on $600,000, which on a 6% interest rate, I ran some calculations on that. You're looking at $36,000 per year. So that's $690 a week. So cool. You're paying $690 a week to live in your home. It's worth $1 million. You've got $600,000 in debt in it.
Yeah.
You're like, cool. That's more than enough to make those repayments. And then you're like, well, I want to go to an $800,000 debt so I can pull out that extra $200,000. That's meaning now you're holding $800,000 in debt. So your repayments, again,
it's an extra 200 grand on that loan.
Yep.
So your repayments are how much?
Well, did the calcs on that. So it's going up to $48,000 per year, which is $920 a week. So an increase of $230 roughly per week to have access to that $200,000 in available cash.
And this is the huge there's so much to unpack in this, and this is the big understanding of building wealth, like wealth creation versus going backwards. And there's a huge difference between buying an asset and buying a liability. So some people think, cool, I've got cash here, I can go and spend that on whatever it is, a car.
Depreciates in value.
Yeah, it's anything that depreciates in value, right?
Yeah.
Go buy a car or a boat or anything. A holiday, you're paying finance on that money. It's so important. Now, it's very strategic to do when you're going to buy an asset that is going to grow over time without very little work for yourself. We actually in America, in our business, we help a lot of people do what they call a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit, and they'll go away and take equity out. They'll increase that loan a little bit. But they're able to get finance at a much cheaper interest rate, by taking money out and purchasing that asset versus getting a business bank or business loan or whatever it is. So it can be to your advantage, but it's a double-edged sword in a sense, right?
Yeah, well, you want to be making sure, like from a business perspective, that increase in repayment. So in this example, if you're pulling that $200,000 of equity out, a little bit more, you've got to figure out a way to pay that $230 extra a week. If you're buying an investment property, you're using that $200,000 as your deposit, but then you're still going to have the additional debt that comes with that property, right? So you need to be running your cash flows on in that sense, because you're essentially borrowing from yourself that $200,000. That's borrowed funds essentially, and then you're also getting a loan out for that investment property, which might have, say, a debt of $500,000. So you put the two together, it's a $700,000 asset, but you're now carrying that extra $700,000 in debt essentially. So you need to make sure that you understand the dollar implications on your cash flow before pulling that trigger and buying the property, because a lot of banks will be like, yeah, you can afford to buy this, you got the equity, you got that borrowing serviceability, based on these calculations you can make those repayments. That's a really good indication that you can do it. However, you've got to understand your own personal journey and whether you want to, that might end up being $300 extra a week in having to put your household budget to holding an investment property, as an example. So based on that, is like, can you do that for the next 10 years? And if the answer is yes, then that's really great. Some people sit there and go, oh, no, I don't want to do it. It's too hard. I like going on my holidays and, going on the piss on the weekends kind of vibe. And that's that you're not future-proofing yourself in regards to putting money to work harder for you, because yes, this might be costing you an extra $300 a week, but if it's growing in value by 30 grand a year, it's paying for itself essentially, and more so. And then the compounding effects of time, history just shows that it's forever in your favor.
Yeah, which we've talked about in other episodes of like how buying an asset, you may be going backwards $50 to $100 a week and not paying positive. You might not have a positively geared property, but if it's in a good capital growth area, you're going to make far more money back in terms of equity and value versus what you could in just the rental yield. So it's understanding this in different ways and different flavors, and also realizing this is, I think, when people start to change and flip the script on building wealth versus non-building wealth, is when they do start to make some sacrifices on entertainment expenses like holidays and a bigger car, better car, fancy car, make me look good, and make my life look like I've got my life sorted, and I'm better than people, it's a big difference. So that's, I want to talk about that so we've talked about that if you own your own home, right? From the lens of like, if you own your own home, you can take equity out and yes, buy another property. And if the numbers stack up and you do it right, like you use us to help you buy it, then you are going to be better off financially in the long run. Now, that's with a home, but let's talk about it from a lens of a investor. Say somebody that is a rent investor that's like trying to wrap their head around, like, okay, cool. So if I bought a property for $450,000 and it's worth $800,000, and they're like, all right, I've got $350,000 there in sort of equity, I guess. Is that correct? Like, depends on what their loan is, right? So say their loan is like, say their loan was like 300 or it's 350, right? And they bought a $450,000 property. That means they've probably got like, I don't know, $450,000 in equity, right?
Yeah, I'm getting lost in the numbers, man.
Yeah,
there's equity and then there's a available equity.
Equity.
That's just the coin that I throw out.
Let's break down that then. Let's break down what equity is there versus available equity.
Well, it's the 80%, so you can draw that out. So if you've got, so in that example, $1 million is the asset value. Your equity is $400,000 because you got $600,000 in debt. But your available equity is $200,000 because you're pulling that out on an 80% loan to value ratio.
So, for example, let's just say somebody buys a property for $400,000, right? And they use they've got $300,000 in debt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then that property increases value from $400,000 to $800,000. Now, what is their available equity? What's their equity, and then what's their available equity?
So 350 in, so 300 in debt,
300 debt, 400 property price when they first bought it, and it's worth now $800,000.
Oh yeah, 800,000. You got $500,000 in available equity, and then you go, all right, the property's worth $800,000. What's 80% of $800,000 minus 160 off 800? You're looking at 640. So 640 available debt, you've got $300,000 in debt, so you've got $340,000 in available equity.
Okay, so you did 80% of the 800, and that was the debt that you would have at 80% LVR. Okay, and that left you with 340 in
available
equity.
Yeah, and you've got $500,000 in equity in that sense, because you've got the debt at 300, value is 800. This is generally why I like using round numbers.
Yeah, this is good. This is good because I'm still like, I just want to conceptualize this for everyone.
Yeah.
So say that again.
So in this example, $800,000 in asset value.
Yeah.
You got your debt at $300,000.
Yes.
Fantastic. So 800 minus 300 is 500,000 in equity.
Okay.
In available equity, in my term, if you go to that 8% loan to value ratio, you're going, well, an asset's worth 800,000. What's 80% of 800,000? For me, I sit there and go, well, that's, as I said, 640,000 because you go, it's 160 is 20% of 800,000. So that's 640 plus your 60 gives you that 700 plus the extra 100 gives you 800.
Okay, so it's 640 in debt that you can go up to.
Yeah, so you go, okay, cool, Mr. Lender, this is my asset, it's my investment property, it's worth $800,000. I want to pull some equity out. Let's go to the 80% loan to value ratio. What does that actually allow me to do? They'll run the figures based on your household.
You speak to a mortgage broker for this or your bank, right?
100%. Yeah. And you ask them, they'll get your tax returns, cash flows, income, outgoings, and then they'll go, yep, Jared, you can service debt up to $640,000.
So 80% LVR.
An 80% loan to value ratio, and a lot of the good mortgage brokers will sit back and go, well, you're doing this, your borrowing capacity, is, let's call it $200,000 on top of that. So you go, and that's based on you need to have an income coming through, which are investment property. So then they go, well, your target would be acquiring a, say, $600,000 property.
Well, let's slow down. Let's slow down. Sorry. So you've got six. So you've just taken your debt from 300 grand.
Yep.
To 640 grand
Yep.
on a property that you bought for $400,000. It's now valued at $800,000.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go and how much equity can you take out then?
Well, the difference would be you had the 300.
Yeah.
And then if you can get access to that full 80%,
Mm-hmm.
but your debt will go from 300 to 640. So you're increasing at 340 grand.
Okay, so is that your equity that you pull out?
Yes.
So you pull out 340 of equity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So then you've got this cash. You haven't got it yet because you're just working out the figures with your broker. But you've got this availability that you could take out because the bank has said, yeah, we'll give you 340 cash or equity if you bring it up to 640 loan size.
Yep.
And so then you got that money to play with.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've also got to understand, let's just stick with the first property, the first investment. With that first investment, your repayments will go from what you're paying on $300,000 of debt to $640,000 of debt.
Yes.
So understand that your repayments will go up.
Yes. More than double,
right?
Yeah.
Now, with that, this is where people freak out a little bit, I think, because they go, oh, I'm paying more, so how am I going to afford that debt? Well, if you bought a $400,000 property and you were charging $400 a week rent, surely if the property is worth $800,000, you're charging $800 per week in rent.
Oh, well, it depends on the market.
It depends on the market, but let's use round figures. Is that like, we could assume that is semi-accurate?
Yeah, well, I'd go further and say, I buy properties all around Australia.
Okay.
Generally, the values increase faster than the yield.
Okay, so let's not get off track then. Would we be safe to assume $700 a week?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be more comfortable with that.
All right, because we could go down the tangent, but I don't want to lose us here. So we've gone from $400 a week of rent to $700 a week of rent as that property has increased from 400 grand to 800 grand. So then if you've got $700 a week in rent, like people are like, oh wow, like yes, you're making you're obviously definitely positively geared, right, for that loan size because you've only got a $300,000 loan size. Now people are going to be worried about, oh well, I won't make as much passive during that year of income because I actually, I'm going to increase my loan, which means can I afford to pay that loan of $640,000? Well, if you got $700 per week in rent, surely you should be able to still be like just over positively geared or neutral for that property now for the repayments on a 640 loan versus 300 loan and getting $700 a week in rent. Now, where this also comes into play is I remember speaking to our friend and he's like, oh, I'm just paying tax on this income for this property. I want to bring my tax down. This is the perfect strategy for that because people may think, oh, I'm positively geared, which is great, but you are paying tax on that income as well, right? It's investment income.
Yep, add to your household income.
It adds to your personal income, right? If you don't have that property in, say, a trust or a different entity, then it'll increase your personal income, and that's the highest tax bracket, right? So if you decrease that down to being neutral, and then you're taking money from this first property, then you can invest into another property, right? So you're bringing your tax bracket down, you're investing more money, and you're building your wealth a lot faster because you're paying less tax, and then you're shifting your equity that you do have into another asset that's in a high growth area. So I think there's a lot. Like, is there anything else that you want to iron out in that? Because then I want to move from one asset to the next asset and what they look like together.
Yeah,
with round figures.
Yeah, I'd probably just hit on it's the psychological side that people struggle with, and it holds them back. And I fully understand it, and you're not meant to know this stuff because they don't teach you this in school. This is the issue with the education system. But just by learning it and going through and talking to the right people, we start to get educated. But a lot of people hit that barrier going, well, I bought this property a few years ago. It's fine at that point now. It's paying me an income. I can, go and live my life in a different way now because I'm feeling more financially abundant. And it's that stage where it's like most investors just stop at one investment property because it's like that short-term mindset where if you just go and do the same thing, rinse and repeat, sure, you're going to have another few years of like, going on lavish holidays and having all those lavish things, but it all compounds, right? And that's the whole journey we're trying to take people through is that it's not hard. It's just, sticking to your goals and what actually is that you want, where you want to be in the next 10, 20 years. And it might be that you go from a positive cash flow environment to a negative cash flow environment with your investments. But we hit on this in a previous podcast where it's like, what would you rather? A property that grows $95,000 in value over a 9-month period, or something that's giving you $10 cash flow per week,
or even $100 positive cash flow a week?
Yeah, so you sit back and go, well, $100, that's call that $5,000 max a year. I'd take the 95 every day of the week and take the negative cash flow carry. But that's my personal circumstances. Whereas other people, they might it might not be that that's where they're lit up. But I'm saying to you now, there's locations in Australia where we can find positive cash flow properties with good growth prospects.
Yeah.
They may not be as strong as other locations in Australia. However, you can still get in, and you can still invest, and it's still increasing its capital value because it's got really good fundamentals driving it, and you get that cash flow. So it's just like you need to be talking to the right people.
Absolutely. And this is why we are here to help you guys not just understand this through the free pod, but this is like how you build a property portfolio, and most people don't understand this. And there's so many nuances towards your personal situation and the property that you own, whether you have what structure you have it in, what you don't have it in, your income, your personal income, your job, how much that is, the tax that you're paying, what you can save on tax, and what you can gain with investment. And I think with that, I want to continue on with this thread of the example of the property and the first property, and then investing in another one.
Before we continue today's pod, I want to ask you a few questions. What is your property investment goal? What type of properties do you want to own? How many? What size valuation property portfolio do you want to own? And how much in net income do you want to be earning? Essentially, what's your magic number in passive income that you want to be earning? And do you know how to get there? And if you do you know how to get there in the least time possible with the least amount of risk?
Sam and I have been helping people invest in property and build property portfolios for years. People who are now replacing their income through property, and we want to help you do the same. Right now, for a limited time, we are offering free property coaching to our listeners. We won't be able to do this forever, of course, so head to propertypowers.au/coaching. That's propertypowers.au/coaching to see how we can help you achieve your investment property goals. Link will be in the description too. So we've got $340K cash, and we can use that to buy another property. Our repayments are more on the $640,000 loan, and we've got rent. So let's just say, for example, after like maintenance and all that sort of stuff, we're pretty neutral on that property. Maybe slightly, let's just say we're neutral on that property. If you were to be a little bit like more negatively geared, like $50 a week or $100 a week, wouldn't stress too much on this as an example, right? Because if you buy in a high growth location, like I said, you could offset that negativeness. Also, it'll bring down, if the property's in your personal name, the first one, it'll bring down your taxable income as well. So then you've got that first, that's that first property out of the way, right? It's got like, cool, we've got $340K cash. Now let's go, okay, Mr. Broker, how much can I lend? Let's look at our borrowing capacity. So what does that look like? And then how do we, move to another asset? And let's talk about like what it would look like to buy another asset and own two.
Yeah, well, you look at it this way. You've got that asset now, $700,000, $800,000.
Yes, 800. Yeah.
And you're getting $700 a week. You call that like you did have that $300,000. Your positive cash flow. You've now drawn the equity out. You now have 640, but you're getting that extra rental at $700 a week. So say that's sitting around neutral. If you're paying debt on that, it's $640,000 a week.
Yep.
Well, you're kind of back to square one where you were when you bought that initial property.
But you got 340k cash.
Correct.
Exactly.
So you use that cash, and then that's your deposit for the next one. So you can go in and basically you can buy a house for 340k cash. And if that is returning a positive income, then it's all paying for itself essentially. You can go, well, depending on your borrowing capacity with your banks, you can go, well, I can pull out that equity at 340 grand. Mr. Banker comes in and goes, well, Jared, based on your income, you could actually afford $500,000 in a property. So we can give you a little bit more debt on that front. But in that requirement, you need to be chasing a rental income of $500 a week. So you see how it's starting to narrow down, and it's giving you the guidance. And it's like, well, cool. Now we go shopping for a $500,000 property, but renting $500 a week.
Yeah,
roughly. We might find a really cracker $450,000 property that's renting at $450 a week. It's the same yield.
Yes,
that's the target and the cash flow side of things. So
yeah, that's really cool. You're targeting the same sort of yield there. So if you got 300, my thing is like, hang on a second, like I'm like, say I'm making 80, 90 grand a year, right? And I'm like, all right, cool. I've got this first property. It's neutral now, and I've got 340k cash to go invest. And I'm like, how do I get the best ROI out of 340k? So like, say we split that up into two, right? So it's 170 each, right? Is that right? Yeah. So, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Well done.
I'm not good at maths.
No, you should get my brother-in-law in here. He's like, you're like, hey man, what's 26 by 52? And he's like, yeah, 1,652. You're like, what?
I was just struggling to just keep my head above water in this episode here. So we got 100. So I'm like, all right, if we've got 340, like, can I go buy 3 properties? Is that a bit of a stretch? Could I go buy 3 $400,000 properties with $100k deposit on each? Is it an 80k deposit on each with, like, say 20k entry cost, right? Let's just use that. Is it a possibility? Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, right? Or can we go buy 2 properties and spend 250 grand, right? And keep a little bit of cash in our own pocket to build up for the next property when we're ready, or not in our pocket. Obviously, we would put it in an offset account, right? Because we're smart. But yeah, so like, then it starts to become like, how do we build this property portfolio to be the best it can be? Strategy.
Everyone's circumstance is completely different. So you just need to book in, have a session, just talk about what's best for you. Because it's sort of like what Andy was speaking about in the previous podcast. It's like, you hear it all the time, and it's just accurate. Like, it all depends on your individual circumstances to see what best is the next step. And it's obviously a big part of what I do as a property strategist.
I think, and I love talking about strategy as well. Absolutely love it. Like, I was just so vibing out on it last Friday, talking about it. But it depends on, so it really depends on your comfort levels as well. And like, for me, like, I want to go really fast, and I'm prepared to take on maybe a little bit more risk than most people because I have a different life situation, in terms of like no family and whatnot. But say if somebody wants to just take it a little bit slower, like, instead of like trying to force 3 properties, or maybe you can buy 2 better properties with 170 towards each one, or maybe you just buy 1 with most of that equity of cash. Or what you could do is you could just stay in the game and just play as a way of like, oh, I've got 340 here, how about I take 140 and just buy 1 property?
You're getting smart here. So that's,
and then get comfortable with it, right?
That's all. Regardless of, even if you wanted to go and buy 3, we sit down, we have a session, and we're just like, well, we need to start with
We need
the next one.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, you got one, now let's go for two. Based on what your borrowing capacity is, we'll have that parameters. It might be like we have this conversation. I do have this conversation a lot. I've got a couple of clients at the moment. Sam, I've got $1.5 million to spend. Where do I spend it? And it's like, well, based on your portfolio, we need to at least get that comfort level of a few residentials, and then we're looking to those higher cash flow properties like your commercial, rooming house, things like that. So it's like, well, based on this, let's say our foundation is really strong. I don't buy house and land packages, new product like that, because they just lack in that capital growth prospect.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Go and check out our house and land packages podcast episode.
Go check that one out. And I'd sit there and go, well, you've got a really broad variety of what we can invest in, so let's just go and cherry pick the best market, like into what we can find. Mm-hmm. So I can't print the perfect property, but let's go and try and find one. And based on that, we present it and go, well, this fits all these parameters. It's in a good growth location, got that cash flow. If you want to get to 3, we need to focus on decent cash flow, because you need to be able to service that debt. Once you find that asset and you transact on that asset, then you sit back and go, well, you might have, if you've got $1.5 million in your head, you're like, I want to go 3. And you go, cool, well, that's $500,000 roughly each property. We might find an absolute cracker at $600,000. And it's got really great potential, good cash flow. It's very rare find. We can negotiate it really, really well. Then you're like, okay, cool. Well, that's now in your portfolio. What does this now look like?
Let's reassess.
Yeah, from a financing perspective, and even from like you're going down the buyer's agent route. Like I say to people all the time, like you're coming. This is the first time with us, so let's take it one step at a time, because there's so many, and obviously a lot of key part of what we do here is making sure you're talking with the best buyer's agents. And people do, like, it's all, you don't know who you're getting in bed with until you're actually in bed with them, right? And there's good people, there's average, and there's poor performance on that front. So, and I often people with the biggest marketing budgets are the worst. There's kind of just a bit of a disclaimer there. I got sucked into this. I love like video sales funnels and stuff at the moment, and like, man, there are some people like really encapsulating. Like, obviously, I'm not that great at that, but it's just they pinpoint so many key points. It's a great presentation. It sucks you in, but then you figure out. Like, I just know because I know what they're talking about. Like, oh, that is just fraught with danger.
Yeah, the strategy. Like, so you've got to think about their intent of what their goal is with their business is to get you to buy, let's just be really rough, like with, say, residential property buyers agents. Their goal is for you to buy 10 residential properties, all at like, maybe not at the 800K range, but like at the 400, 500K range, and buy as many as possibly can, because
they're making 15 grand.
They're making 15 grand a prop, and then also you also you say you could afford $1 million property, right? They're like, no, buy 500. They might be like, buy lots of $500,000 properties, so you're spread out and your risk is not too bad. But like that means they get 2 deals out of one, right? They're making 30 grand instead of 15 grand from just one deal. So you need to understand this as well. Like you need to come back, and that's why it's always good to just buy one, come back, reassess your strategy, which is what we like to help people do, because maybe it is just buying 2 resis at the start, or 3, or maybe it is 4, depending on your personal situation. And it'll be a different price ranges each time, and then you might move into another asset type. Like, you need to be very careful.
And the big part I'd say is, like, I get emails from builders, developers offering me, house and land packages will pay you $30,000 to $40,000 for a client that transacts on one of our house and land packages. And then buyers agents in that new space, they're actually also charging people $15,000 to $18,000 in advice and buyers agents fees on top. So this is the smoke and mirrors BS in the industry, is that like these guys are getting paid like 50 grand for you to go and buy a property. And that's why they have such great marketing budgets and really savvy video campaigns. And like, it's like, cool, well, let's have a debate about it if you actually really want to, because what is in the best interest of your client? And it's not buying a house and land package on the outskirts of boom. Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say that different. In the outskirts of like, the boonies. Yeah, the boonies. And it's like, well, cool, well done. Tax depreciation. Go back to our old episode. we talk about this a bit further.
So there's a lot of things to think about. Is like your personal situation, your personal finance, your tax situation, your risk tolerance, and then your strategy, and then there's all these other little things in between. We're talking about here in this episode building a property portfolio using property and equity from your properties. There is also concerns that people like, hang on, if I take my loan from, let's use this example before, right? You got the $400,000 property that you purchased. It's now worth $800,000. You had $300K on debt, and you've gone up to $640K down on that one. Then you go, I'm going to go buy another property, right? Because you got $340K in cash and equity, and let's just say you buy two. And let's just say you buy two $500,000 properties. That means you're going to take your finance from $300,000 to $640 plus another, let's just say they're $600,000 properties, right? And you've bought them with $100K deposit. I know that might not work financially, but this is an example because I want to keep round figures. You got two other properties with $500,000 of debt in each one, those new properties you just purchased, and then you got $640 from the first one. So you got three properties, and you've got $1.64 million in debt. For that, and I'm really amping this up in a way that people are like, damn, I got $1.6 million in debt, and people are thinking, my goal is to not have debt.
Change that mindset.
Yeah, and it's we have been taught in depending on what who's to say what is right and wrong, but
parents, everyone was taught historically, buy a house, pay it off.
Yeah, and
that was it.
Exactly, and it's just a shame when you are locked into your job because your goal is just to pay off your home and own it outright, when you can get out of your job quicker and have more time independence, location independence or whatever it is you want, by not paying off your home, by buying more assets and getting more debt and using debt to your advantage. And there's a really good book called The Debt Millionaire by George Anton. Changed my, and shout out to Charlie who recommended that to me. A mentor and a business partner of mine, previous mentor and business partner of mine, changed my thinking on debt and why I should acquire more good debt to get myself into a wealthier position, and that can help me help more people, and that's what you guys essentially want to do as well. First, start with yourself, get yourself into a better position, and then when you got time, freedom, and resources, then you can put it into helping people like your kids and others. And
the biggest takeaway on that conversation, was just good debt. Finding good assets, and that's the thing. You can go and do these strategies. You can go and pull equity out, buy another house. But if it's a property that it might be in your suburb that you love, and you think it's going to boom because it
might make you feel nice, rosy, and cozy inside.
Yeah, and you can go around there and mow your lawns, but the location might not actually do anything for the next 3-5 years, and you sit there and go, well, you're then obviously making all these repayments, but there's locations in Australia. I mean, go back and look at the data does show that there's locations in Australia that actually increased in value during 2008, 2009, 2010, and you sit back and go, well, this is the most, I guess, prevalent.
Biggest downturn in the market.
Yeah, in our
how is they going to be properties growing?
Yeah, and it's like if you go back to the news, the world was ending. Financial crisis, Sydney house prices. I think I even went back and looked at the data. I think the house prices in Melbourne dropped 7% on a year. I think overall, on the 2-year basis, the biggest drop was around 10%. And you're like, cool.
10%. It only dropped 10%.
Yeah,
that is amazing.
Yeah.
That is so good. That's if that's the worst case scenario when you purchase an asset, that is for me phenomenal.
Yeah, but in property too, it's like as long as you've got the rental income coming through, you don't care as much about the world doesn't, it never ends, right? It's always going to keep spinning. If it actually ends, the last thing you're going to be thinking about is, I wonder what my property's doing.
Yeah,
you're going to be thinking about how do I feed myself and how do I get and if the world does end. Then at least you've ended
as well.
I mean, come back to sort of your hierarchy of needs, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're talking about investing because it's a great way to get you that time and financial independence. To do the things that you want to do in the world. Like, we were not put in this world to, go and work, for a customer service role at, ANZ Bank or something. Like, you didn't wake up going to school or go, what do you want to do with your life? Like, I really want to just be a, checkout person. Anyway, digressing on that.
And if you are a checkout person, maybe, like, I know people that have retired and become a checkout person, but that's because they have retired. They don't need the money, right?
Yeah.
That's like actually want to do it. Like, if you're doing it because you're like trying to get ahead, and you don't like it, different story.
Yeah, and also people like just the social interaction of humans. Anyway, yeah. So there's a few little things to cover there, but yeah, it comes back to asset selection. Is what my ramble was going on to, is like, make sure that you're amplifying opportunity cost by getting into the best locations and the best asset. And I'm telling you now, like, it's taken like decades of just research and knowledge to get to a point so that I know the stuff that I'm talking about, and also Jared. And it's just like, well, you're not meant to know these things. That's why we doing the podcast, and that's why we want to put you in front of the best people to give you the right advice, and obviously oversee that whole transaction. So you're actually going to do really well in life, and pass it on. Educate people around you, and like help them do it themselves, or at least point them to the people that we point you. It's that infinite loop that we spoke about.
Exactly. And when Sam says, like, it's decades of us learning, it's literally decades. Like, I picked up my first personal development book and my first wealth book when I was 15. It's 20 years ago. So it's 2 decades. And another thing is, when it comes to investing in the right properties, like, go and, you need I highly recommend buyer's agents and outsourcing and building your team and outsourcing a lot of this work to other people. There's one thing that you should not outsource, and that is the responsibility. Your responsibility to check everything is done the right way, and to be responsible for the strategy as well. Like, you can get advice, but at the end of the day, you need to be the decision maker too, not just do this, do that, and just be a sheep and then getting pushed from one paddock to the next when it may not be the best way.
Yeah, and there's some really good marketing campaigns out there, and there's many different strategies. It's what you resonate with, but also understanding the ins and outs. Like, a lot of people do want to become developers because they like that idea around it, but once you start to get educated into that process, it may not be for you, because it's not like it might be a get rich quick scenario for some, but it's what's the time and the energy and the education you need to get to that point. And there's a lot more failures than there are successes on that front. But yeah, it's the few key points that I always say to people is, if you don't understand it, don't invest in it, and always take a night to sleep on any major decision in life, because it gives you some perspective. Makes you think about it.
Yeah. I like it.
Wrap it up there, hey?
See you in the next one, guys.
Bye for now.